recognize Ranking Member Lankford for his questions.
Thank you. Again, I appreciate all of you. This group are not the policy makers. We understand that. You're the ones that are actually carrying the policy out. And so we appreciate the help of knowing what's actually happening on the ground, what's the process on this. The concern that I have, as well as a lot of other folks have, is if I take the previous 12 years, both terms of the Obama administration, all 4 years of the Trump administration, the number of people that illegally crossed the border during that previous 12 years equals the number of people that have illegally crossed the border in less than 3 years under the Biden administration. So when people feel this is structurally different, it's structurally different. There's something that's really changing that's happening on a policy, that's happening in movement of people. Now, this is not me laying blame on all of you. We're trying to figure out the now what. How do we actually figure out the process and what actually happens from here? I do know there's some folks from DHS that are probably watching and monitoring this. Thank you very much for doing that, by the way, and for the engagement and for all of you actually being here. But I would bring up a couple of things just to the DHS folks that are actually tracking all this hearing as well. We've made some very specific requests of them of numbers in the past to be able to turn those over. We're yet to get those in a timely manner. Senator Sinema and I have made a request for special interest alien briefing to be able to get details on that. We've yet to be able to get that briefing. Senator Murphy and I have asked for additional information about the notice to appear delegation of authority that we've asked about. We've yet to be able to get that. And we've asked for a specific briefing on circumvention of lawful pathways to just spend more time with that because that's entirely new as a process. We've yet to get that. So again, none of you are responsible for that, but I do want to be able to put out, this has been an ongoing frustration that we've literally seen as many people cross in less than 3 years than we have in 12, yet when we ask questions about process that are, how is this working, what's happening, how do we get numbers, we're not getting those. So that's why I'm really grateful that all of you are here to be able to walk through some of the process and what's actually happening at this point. I do want to skip to one of the questions that we have for Senator Sinema and I, and that is on the special interest aliens. For individuals that are crossing the border right now, and it's by the thousands from Mauritania, what criminal history, background information, data do we have on those individuals from Mauritania coming into the country? Do we have any background information on those individuals? Do we have a cooperative agreement with Mauritania to be able to get background criminal information? Do we have any of that data? I don't know of any. I'm asking y'all if y'all know of any. I'm seeing the same expression I have. Y'all don't. Do you know of any criminal history that we're getting on these individuals from Mauritania?
No.
No, I don't know of any either on that. Currently this year so far, just through earlier this year, we've had 10,000 individuals that have come from Mauritania. The vast majority of those, my understanding is, are released somewhere in the country, and we don't know hardly anything about those individuals. We also have a pretty dramatic increase, about 63% increase of Syrians that are coming in the country. We've had almost 15,000 people from China that have come across the border that understand we don't have a criminal history exchange with China. With Pakistan, we have 1,000 folks. We have over 2,000 folks from Somalia that have come. These special interest aliens, we're trying to figure out the details on them, and as far as we can tell, they're being processed and released in the country, awaiting a hearing in the future, and we don't have a day-to-day supervision of those individuals. Is that accurate or not accurate? Mr. Bible.
It's accurate that we're not tracking them on a day-to-day basis, not the totality of them. Some are probably on alternatives to detention where we have more tracking on.
So for those individuals that are on alternatives to detention, how long are they on the alternatives to detention program? Is that months, days? Is that all the way up until their hearing? How long are we tracking those individuals?
Well, we escalate and de-escalate depending on several factors, criminality, compliance with the ATD program, and other factors. Our average length of stay on alternatives to detention is approximately 547 days.
Okay. Is that 547 days until their hearing time, or what is that trigger at that point?
It depends on again of the compliance rate and community ties. We can de-escalate them off the alternatives to detention program if those conditions are met. But we can also scale it up if they are not complying with the conditions of the release.
It's our understanding the vast majority of individuals that are on alternatives to detention, it's 3 or 4 months or less that they're on an alternatives to detention program. Is that accurate or not accurate? You're saying it's a year and a half, basically, that they're on.
I mean, we did have an increase of individuals put on alternatives to detention as they were leaving the southwest border until they reached their destination city where they were de-enrolled, but where they actually checked in, and we were starting to monitor on the non-detained docket.
Well, the last numbers that we had in, that came in from DHS, was tracking about 130 days. That people were on an alternative to detention, and after that they're not. And they're significantly longer than that before their actually hearing date. If they're doing an asylum request, it's our understanding that if they're requesting, for instance, New York, the next open dates are somewhere in 2033 for that hearing time. So we've got a pretty big gap of individuals that have claimed credible fear, have gone through the initial screening, have an alternative to detention for, let's say, a year and a half for the max on that. Most likely, more like 130 days was the last numbers that we had. And then the next 8 years, if they're awaiting that hearing time. In New York, it's shorter in other areas, but in New York and Florida and multiple areas, it could be 7, 8, 9, 10 years before they get to that hearing. Is that accurate or not accurate?
Right now, we are scheduled out approximately 10 years, at least in New York City. However, we are working on technological solutions to where a non-citizen can update their address on our website, request a mail-out NTA, which will allow us to spread out the workload throughout the country and throughout our workforce, where we won't have to just rely on check-ins directly into the New York City office, which doesn't have a physical plan to handle that volume.
What I'd like to do is I'm going to come back for a second round of questions here in a little bit once everybody's gone through, and I want to walk through the process. And what I want to talk through is the difference between an individual at a port of entry that has a CBP-1 app time scheduled, somebody that doesn't have that, somebody that comes between ports of entry, what actually happens to them in the process, and then once they actually leave the border and they're released in the country, what's actually occurring at that point. I want to be able to walk through that process, and so we can get the differences for that individual, because there's pretty serious concerns. It wasn't that long ago I was at the border, and I was at one of the times the gathering, the muster for Border Patrol, and in the muster they were going through standard things, and one of the Border Patrol agents asked the question of leadership at that point, just at this muster, hey, last night or 2 nights ago, we picked up 3 guys from Nicaragua in camo, in their 20s, looked like they were military. What happened to them? And the response was, they were cut loose. We don't have them anymore. And so that kind of dialogue that's happening makes a lot of questions happen in the whole process to try to figure out, but we're trying to figure out how decisions are made when there's 3 guys in camo, clearly military or military age, and trying to figure out what happens next to them. Obviously, it's a case-by-case basis, but everybody's trying to figure out what that actually looks like from there. Senator Blumenthal, you're next for questions.